Now, with all of that said, it is my pleasure to introduce our first panel, Go Fast, Go AVOD, Charting a Streaming Revenue Strategy for Local Media, and its moderator, the esteemed Adam Weiner, the founder of Continuous Media. Adam?
Thanks, Michael. And good morning, everyone. I just want to make sure that the panelists know that that thing about take the conversations outside was really meant for you guys, not necessarily for them. Take it all outside afterwards. But I appreciate everyone showing up this morning, 9 a.m. Javits always a fun trek for people. We're going to just go down quickly and just introduce yourselves, state very briefly who you are and what you do. Obviously, from the order of the thing, I'm Jen Donahue, SVP of Disney Advertising Sales. This is Adam Austra. Go ahead.
Tom Sly. I'm with the EW Scripps Company. I oversee enterprise strategy and the future of TV primarily.
Hi, I'm Jen Donahue. I'm SVP of local sales at Disney, and that is inclusive of our ABC-owned television stations, streaming and digital, and our political business.
My name is Aaron Young, CEO, founder, and managing editor of Ticker in Australia.
Adam Ostro, Chief Digital Officer at Tegna. Our group's responsible for all of our television stations' digital properties, so websites, apps, social, and streaming.
Sonali Pathak, I'm NBC Universal, SVP of BD and Strategy, and I also oversee business operations for our local digital sales.
Well, welcome, everybody. Okay, we're going to jump right into it because I know time is tight, and there's a lot to talk about, and there are a lot of you. First, we're going to start with you, Jen, and it's not just because you and I know each other possibly the longest here, which we do know each other a long, long time. But before I actually ask you the question, I do want to just state that this is a conversation around revenue generation, specifically around FAST and AVOD. Therefore, I am not going to ask you about Iger's comments. That's for another panel with other people, possibly some other time, but not necessarily for here. So if any of you were hoping for that, sorry. But let's start with let's jump right into a question. So. Back in May, your CFO said publicly that the advertising market will come back. Has it? And to what extent? And then also, we read a lot about the evolution, or actually not the evolution, but the migration from linear to streaming, fast, all these other things. Are you seeing that, especially in local?
It's certainly a dynamic marketplace, right? And in dynamic marketplaces, we find that brands are looking to do more with fewer. And so when we think about our business at Disney and local especially, we have one team that is focused on, founded in our foundation of ABC-owned television stations, our 8 outstanding television stations, and then looking at streaming digital opportunities as really incrementality across the scope of what an advertiser is looking to do. And by having one team, we're able to talk to that marketer or agency about specifically what those KPIs are and then how we fill in those gaps across all of our local properties. Not in competition of one, but really as bringing it as a portfolio. We think about, you mentioned a lot of different acronyms to start. The ABC-owned television stations, as an example, not only has 8 great stations, but they put out at least 26,000 hours, I believe, annually of curated content. And then that content runs across not only those stations, but across our premium channels, across specials, across linear opportunities and news. So when we think about what's driving our business from revenue, you also see it in content and then where we put those efforts to be out there for our business. One area for local, I guess, if you look at the number of advertisers this year, we're up 50% in the number of advertisers, and that's really spurred by self-service. Our streaming platforms continue to grow, really driven by the engagement and our ability to offer measurement and targetability. So that's been a great thing. And then we, again, look at it holistically across everything that we have to offer.
I'm going to come back to that self-service thing a little later. Incrementality, that's the word I think I'm going to pull out of that for later. So a quick follow-up to that. Since we're talking about CFOs and their public comments, your CFO recently said in an earnings call that ad revenue to linear is down 5%, while streaming, specifically Peacock, is up 75%. Again, local, same situation?
Well, we're, Yes, I think from our in our upfronts, we were flat year over year as NBC Universal from cash commitments, which we were excited about considering all the headwinds that are going on in the marketplace. When we look at things locally, what's awesome is we tap into products that are national, local, but are all geo-targetable at the end of the day. So whether it's linear stations and our linear products or our streaming products, we're able to combine all of that and sell multi-platform. So for us, total viewership goes up when you count it. When you count not just linear but also our streaming products, and we're super excited about that. And we launched Spot On, which is our digital business, a couple of years ago, and what we saw was digital scale lacking from a local geo-targetable audience perspective. And what we ended up doing was combining our owned inventory along with third-party inventory to be able to sell that, plus our linear. So we've really, I think Jen mentioned it, we've really organized around being able to sell multi-platform and having products that can service all of our clients and is there to reach the audiences that they're looking for.
Thanks. Again, I encourage all of you to jump in as you want. I'm going to throw just a slight curveball here coming off of the two of you. Tom, on the sales side for you, and then I'm going to go to a different question for you, but on the sales side for you, are you also seeing that migration happening, that linear to streaming migration?
Absolutely. I mean, we launched Octane 4 or 5 years ago, which is our extension product, so that we can get targeting at scale in local markets. I think that local advertisers are much easier to guide with the marketing representative, right? That the local representative they look at as their marketing expert, and so they're actually listening to them, and they're understanding that audiences are in different places. So if they want to extend their reach, get that unique reach, often that that CTV or OTT brings, that's the way they have to buy that to get it. So we're seeing much better engagement. I think in our organization on the local level with CTV, FAST, all that extension and O&O inventory than we are on the national side. So so it's been a great business for us. And then the other thing is we're launching on more platforms. We're seeing more impression growth, right? So we've got more audiences in more places, and if we're not filling it with local direct sales, we're also filling it programmatically, and so that's driving more revenue into our local brands.
More audience in more places. I mean, that's like you're talking to brands. It's exactly the words they want to hear, right? It's like I can reach more people in more places.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
And they're unique. These are audiences you're not going to reach necessarily on linear TV because they've chosen a different platform as their primary viewing platform. Right. And if we're not there where they are, then we won't capture them, right?
Okay, I'm going to stay with you for just a moment. Oh, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say I think that is the beauty of what we all do and with local, because every advertiser and company is focused on what drives their sales. And the lessons coming out of COVID too, that regionality and supply chain and being able to really look at that incremental buy too across geo-targeting, you can shift those markets at any time to respond. And where those eyeballs are and where that content goes is even more important.
I'm going to stay with you for just a minute, Tom. I know this isn't exactly your purview, but I know you can talk a little bit about it. Your counterpart, Brian Lawler, who is head of sports, making a lot of big moves over there, and your company's making a lot of moves in sports. There's a lot of discussion around the demise or the I shouldn't say the word demise, but the evolution of the RSN space, the evolving RSN space. You guys are getting into this pretty heavily with direct relationships with teams and organizations. Is that going to help you on the digital revenue side? Do you see that, whether long-term and streaming? Do you see that short-term and long-term?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have, in our negotiations, we generally have the digital rights for distribution of the content. It's a package, right? So we're actually going with, and we have a unique footprint. Often we have a second independent station in the markets where we're doing this, so we can actually create and almost stand up like in Las Vegas, a station that's largely focused on sports and news. But sports and news are what drive TV viewing, period, end of story. And so in the more places we can put that great content, that unique content, the more audience we're going to drive, and the more impressions and more revenue.
Awesome. I moderated a panel at NAB back in the spring where Brian Lawler sat on that panel and Kerry, the president of the Golden Knights. 2 weeks later, they announced the deal. I was like, did I help make that happen somehow? Anyway, Adam, I want to move on to you. Tegna's very strong with AVOD. And we talk a lot about FAST. There's a lot of discussion around FAST. There's a lot of discussion around streaming, et cetera. But AVOD is still a tremendous business, right? Video on demand, supported by advertising. You guys are really, really strong there, notably on YouTube, but also your own owned platforms. Can you just talk a little bit about how you monetize that space and how you work with the sales side of your house to make sure that they understand how to package that in and sell it effectively?
Sure, yeah, there's a few different elements of our AVOD strategy. Probably the oldest would be YouTube, and what we've done there is, essentially YouTube's our short form platform, right? So that's where, clips from our shows, raw video, et cetera, is going. And increasingly we're also leaning into YouTube's Shorts platform. So in aggregate, we're doing, hundreds of millions of views per month on YouTube. And kind of the nice thing about that too, people, still talk about YouTube and cannibalization to some degree, but when we look at, what people are watching on those channels, about 2/3 of it is content that was published before 2023. So it's really helping us monetize kind of a library of older content.
Which is, by the way, shocking to me in some way, right? Because, when I was at CBS for years, I always used to say we were in the fresh fish business, right? People wanted to, yesterday's fish didn't sell, right? It's like the weather report from yesterday gets nothing, right? But actually older content is killing it.
Yeah, and we do notice some differences in the audience on YouTube, right? Most of the people consuming our YouTube content are actually out of market. So as it relates to monetization, it tends to be more of a programmatic national sale as opposed to local. But when we move over to our streaming platforms, right, so in the last couple of years, we've launched all of our stations, streaming apps on Roku, Fire TV, all the leading platforms. We've taken kind of an approach of each station has their own app. So we have King 5 Plus in Seattle, 11 Alive Plus in Atlanta, et cetera, et cetera. And that business has been growing really, really fast for us as well. And that's kind of where you can get the 24/7 feed. That's a combination of our newscasts, evergreen content. For us, sports at the moment is more about shoulder programming. So we own an asset called Locked On Podcast Network, which does daily shows for every single team across the 4 major sports, dozens of colleges. So that's a big part of the 24/7 streams as well. So that business has been growing really quickly for us. And then, of course, we also own Premion on the advertising side. We were an early mover in kind of the local streaming ad space. And that monetization is both for Premion's publishing partners, but then also on our owned and operated apps as well.
Awesome. And you have a phenomenal team there. I mean, guys like Chris Fairman and others, I mean, really, they help you supercharge the money, right, which is great. Aaron, I want to move on to you, talk a little bit about, before I have a couple questions for you, but before I do, as somebody who launched some local fast channels about local news, could you just tell the folks about what Ticker is and what you've done and how you've accomplished
absolutely. Michael Depp refers to me as the outlier on the panel. So Ticker began 4 years ago, right into a global pandemic, of course, and then into everything that's happened since, as well as what's been happening in the TV industry. And I always think of this first call that I had when we thought about going the tried and tested startup path of getting funding. And the person on the other end of the phone said, we would never invest in a media company these days that relies on advertising or subscription. And I said, okay, well, what else is there? And she said, honey, you tell me. And that was essentially what we had to then go off and do. And so we launched in Melbourne back in 2019 as a 20-minute-a-day Facebook Live. We now run 6 different fast channels around the world on streaming platforms around the world. A small team. We have a team here in the United States, in New York. We're about to build in Los Angeles too. In the beginning, when people would ask me, what's your revenue model? It kind of felt like the most personal question ever. And it was probably because how do you survive when you bootstrapped it? I used my money from my payout as an anchor at Sky News and bureau chief at Sky News in Melbourne to kick this thing off. And from that, it was essentially keeping our costs down and running it like a small business and growing it as a small business. And I say to the team, don't think of us as a huge company. Think of us as practitioners like a really great dentist. And then you get more of them in different places like localism. And our localism eventually becomes that company. So that's where we are.
So that person asked you for something other than subscription and advertising. Well, so apparently you seem to have done that, right? So you have success with sort of native or embedded advertising. Can you just talk a little bit about that as a sales strategy? How it works with clients. Are you baking in the production costs, into the deals? How do those conversations come about? And then also, what is the experience for the consumer?
Yeah, okay. All great questions. I'll try and keep it short. Basically, the first day we launched, I received about 1,000 emails from PR people saying, my goodness, finally something like this exists. And I didn't know what they were actually talking about, but they wanted to get their clients on Ticker to be thought leaders, right? We think about the news, we think about what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, and the thought leaders speaking about this are retired army generals and things. What we found ourselves covering were other things that were happening in the news, like cybersecurity. There are so many, I think there's 950 million profiles on LinkedIn, and there are a lot of people who want to talk about cybersecurity to get their message out there. And while they want to come onto Ticker to talk about it and to make use of our platform and to be on the news, they also really want to show their world that they've been on the news. And so that became this crazy thing that just developed like wildfire. Because one thing you don't have when you think about what people use money for when they start up a media company, it's usually staff and it's usually marketing to get the awareness up so that the ad team can go and sell ads, right? We thought that might take a long time for us, and a really long time. I'm up against people here whose companies have been around happy 100th. So we kind of looked at it and went, we don't have that much time, and we're going to die if we get to our E round and say, please, can we have some more? We're over. So we've never even had an A round. So from that perspective, you talk about what's the viewer experience. Because doing exactly what we're doing, right? We had Paul up before, who's a sponsor, who's talking great, talking about here's an issue and here's how we're fixing it. And that kind of comes towards the end. It's not a sales pitch. It's essentially information, which is to help the viewer understand a situation. You put it into a news environment. We can do 10 of these interviews per hour talking about different issues that are in the news.
Okay, so I did ask what is the consumer experience on that. I asked that for a very specific reason, because when people hear about native advertising, right, or embedded advertising, they often think about like paid placement, paid product placement, et cetera, right? So, and there needs to be disclaimers and that sort of thing. So what happens there?
They're not paying to come on. That's the great thing. They're coming on to talk about something, and we have IP rights, basically. Do you want to use that interview afterwards on your LinkedIn or on your company website or on your Instagram? Absolutely sure. And then if they say to us, for example, I was listening to the Ray Kroc book as I was riding my bike after that lady said, come up with something else. And I thought about the interviews for us are kind of like the French fries. We need a meal deal. So what we worked out is if we come up with a business package, we could actually use the tools of social media to really target their market, to first put these people as thought leaders in what they're talking about. And the wonderful thing about it is it helps their brand, but it also helps ours. As people share and listen and like because they know these people, they follow them on LinkedIn, they follow them on Instagram and their companies, they're also learning about our little brand too.
Marketing for you.
Yeah, don't tell them that.
Just one last follow-up, and then I'm going to move to some other questions here for the others. You're an Australian company, but you said you have locations around the world. How are you sourcing advertising? Like, how are you selling in those markets? If you're Australian, but you have people here. Like, did you hire a sales team here?
Well, yes and no. So essentially, if you think about how TV and radio began, it was that tower on the hill or on the building, and it could only go as far as that. And 4 years ago, I didn't have that issue when I started Ticker. It had to be everywhere, and we learned very quickly that to be a Melbourne-only news company was pretty silly. And then we moved from that to being national and then to international. Started a bureau here, London, Paris, Singapore, and because our target audience is a 39-year-old who works in finance, they're making key life decisions. We then went from news to actually Joel Anderson, who's the guy we call our target audience, or Emily, his lovely partner. They are into fitness and cooking, so we launched a food channel and an active channel, and we can launch a channel really, really quickly, full of content that, as you say, create it once, use it many, many times. That then got the attention of some big streaming platforms that we've been able to get on around the world. From the Indian market was our first, then right through every territory in Europe, Japan, here in the United States, right across Australia. And at first they didn't really know how to handle us. Like, what is this? But I'm a journalist, and I've worked for big companies before, and you understand how to get in, how to talk the talk. And then part of it was obviously finding advertising as well. Many of these platforms have ad sales teams that quite often we have 3 in a market competing on our behalf to sell ads for us and to get better rates, because while there's 950 million LinkedIn profiles out there, I think pretty soon there's going to be 950 million fast channels too.
What a phenomenal segue, right? Because I want to talk about fast next.
That's what I do.
Thank you. You're a former presenter, right? So there you go. Tom, let me start here. Well, first, I do want to say, the question I'm about to ask, for those of you, Jen, Sonali, who have, pretty big owned and operated platforms, you guys still do distribution into other places, right? The fast platforms that are all out there, that everybody knows about, increasingly becoming more difficult to negotiate with, almost impossible at times to get data from. Obviously, that data has implications if you have direct sales rights into some of those platforms. Tom, can you just talk a little bit about some of the efforts that you guys have done with some of those platforms, or even internally, to try to lookalike, et cetera, get the data that you need to be successful on the direct sales front into those fast platforms?
It's really our distribution team, and look, these are partnerships, but partnerships should be two-way. And I call it distribution equity. I think that we as an industry need to think about distribution equity. We need to make sure that the content creators are getting the data they need so they can effectively monetize it. Buyers want that data. We need to pass that data. We need it for targeting, or we need it for programmatic. And so we're working with our distribution partners to improve those terms, but it's not a perfect world today. And I hope that this message gets out to many of our partners, that we do want to work with you long term. We want to bring great content. We want to bring those unique sports. We want to bring great news programming and all of our entertainment brands. But in order to do that, we need data and better partnership economics. Because I think that's an issue too, right? But at the end of the day, I met with a peer in the space yesterday, another broadcaster, and their company has chosen not to use fast channels. And I was showing them revenue numbers, and I'm just like, I hate to say it, you cannot ignore this. This is significant. The apps were a good business early on, but if you're not on fast channels, you are missing probably 75% of the opportunity of where audience is today. The OEMs and these platforms have done a wonderful job, and they've invested in building and growing audiences. And if our products aren't there, I think we're missing out, because I can't choose the platform that my wife or my friends or whoever, a viewer, wants to view our content on. I just need to make sure that if they choose that platform as their platform of choice, that our content is there so they can find it.
Anybody else? Any comments on that? It's funny. There's so much media discussion. The air is sucked out of the room on so much conversation around subscription, right? It's the Netflix earnings calls are picked apart. Everybody is talking about earnings calls of big platforms, et cetera. And I feel like there's sort of a quick dispelling of maybe fast as an opportunity. People don't want to believe it, but I'm a big believer. You can never underestimate the power of free to the consumer, right? So, people love free, and so especially if it's going to be baked into your OS, TV OS, it's undeniable, as you said. You mentioned at one point, I think, to me about the creation of a marketplace to attack that from I guess a grouping of people. Do you remember that conversation that we had about? Yeah. Yeah.
It's the Independent Streamers Alliance is the ISA, and it's just a group of, I think, smaller company, and so not 100-year-old companies, they're larger companies, but that are looking for a number of things. But the distribution equity, we call it, that's certainly one piece of it. more importantly, we're trying to create awareness of the value of those audiences, because often they're very unique audiences and they're difficult to reach. I mean, Jen said earlier, buyers are trying to buy more from less, like fewer people, like supply path optimization, right? And so what do we do if we're small or medium-sized companies? I don't know where we fit in. Are we medium, small, large? I don't know what we are. We're not as large as some of the other ones here. And so how do you have a voice? And how can we come together? It's not to fight. It's coming together to help people understand the value that we can bring to advertisers, and that's what we're working on.
Okay, let's keep going a little bit here. Sonali, short as 2 years ago, this is really for anyone who wants to jump into, short as like 2 years ago, fast platforms were just onboarding any channels that they could get their hands on, right? It was unbelievable that just, if you had a channel, the big bottleneck was them, basically the technology to onboard you was the testing and that sort of thing, right? Situation sort of turned now 180 degrees where now these companies are realizing that, brands matter to people. Discovery is a challenge. And maybe it's too many channels. It's a little bit like, I guess the cable business went through the same thing. And so, there's now discussions around actively culling of some of those channels. Disney and NBC seem to, it seems like you guys have brands that are very friendly to get carriage on FAST if you wanted to go that way, and but potentially maybe others might find it more difficult. Would you say that's a true statement? Are you guys getting carriage more easily, or is it still a negotiation?
I mean, I don't know if it's more easily than others. We're not in other folks' conversations, but getting our brands on, and when you think about it from a more local perspective, there's a lot of channels out there, right? National channels, fast channels, local fast channels, and I don't disagree with the culling of channels. I think that's every platform's prerogative. We want to make sure there's quality content out there for as many viewers as possible, and you can go niche, and but I do think that the criteria that's being used should be fair across. Our Hartford station, fast channel, should that be compared to a national fast channel when you're thinking about culling the bottom 10%? No, there's obviously UI challenges and where's your channel placement? There's a lot of variables, I think, that should be considered, and as long as there's transparency there, and then there's a chance for also us to take a look at, is it really truly the content, or is it something else that we need to work on? When we talked about just data in general, I think that's where data matters, not only from an ad sales perspective, but also from creating channels that really serve the audiences, because if we don't get that data, then we won't know. So I think it's really prevalent and great for both sides of the platform and for us to be able to create great content via data, and then also to be able to target audiences for our clients.
Could I just jump in on that, because I'm probably on the other side as one of the people, as I say, a smaller company and a smaller streamer having these conversations. And the insight from our perspective is it's all about value, right? It's about, you talk about free is fantastic. Well, these guys want free and valuable, and that's where we've had to find a business model that can offer something for free in the hope that the revenue in many of these different markets. I'm in the Asia Pacific market, and our distributor, technological partner, who we would all know, says to us, oh, that's the worst performing market in the world is Asia Pacific. Good luck. And you think, okay, great. So we've had to find a way to provide value to be on these platforms before the checks start to roll in. And that's where we had to go down a very different business path, because I'm the sort of owner who doesn't have a cover on my phone, because I want to be able to take a risk with something valuable without believing that I'm going to drop it, And I think that that's the key when you're entering all of these different things. I've attended conferences where people have jumped up and said, you told us to go into AVOD, now you're telling us to get into FAST. What's going to be next? And making sure that the real things that matter to your company always stay true as you test and see.
Yeah, but even with that poorly performing market, as you say, it's still about the data, right? You still need to know if your thing is actually succeeding, right? So
yeah, niches work for us. That's why we went down that path.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's, at the moment, there's no doubt there's, I think, an oversupply of fast channels out there, and where we see that in the limited data we do have, is that when we look at the rapid growth in audience, we're seeing the monetization's not keeping up, right? And that's both, I think, a combination of really big players entering the space, whether it's Peacock or Disney Plus or Netflix, all having ad-supported tiers, but also the thousands of FAST channels that exist now, right? So this year, when you combine kind of the economic headwinds with the glut of supply, I think that is creating a bit of a monetization challenge in spite of how quickly the audience is growing. On the plus side, I think local content is in demand. I think all the platforms are always reaching out, trying to get our content. When we look at it, though, we're not necessarily taking a ubiquity strategy. We kind of look at, okay, the metric we use to normalize it is how much revenue are we bringing in per hour of consumption. And it varies quite a bit from what we get on our owned and operated apps to the various FAST platforms. To the ones on the bottom, we're making maybe 1/10 of what we make on our owned and operated.
So a glut of inventory and economic headwinds. It's easy to take those phrases and think, okay, well, maybe that's what's causing some of the migration in the budgeting going from linear to FAST, because maybe it's driving down the prices on the FAST side from what it used to be. Anybody experiencing that, or am I just spitballing here?
I would say for us, when we think about ABC-owned television stations, so sure, like Tom said, it's important to meet the consumer, the viewers where they are, so we are in FAST. We also have a 24/7 streaming platform for those stations. And then when we sell Disney advertising in general, that's part of our cross-portfolio program, like XP. And so if you're buying Disney Plus or Hulu or ESPN Plus, our ABC-owned television station streams are in there. So, the monetization of it all comes back to that central point. Like, are we talking to the client about everything that we can do and geo-targeting to where they need to find more viewers?
It's about audience, right? It's not necessarily the product.
But you're right, though, about, this place and time we're in today, though, I think is, let's call it, we've been in an ad recession. It's been a relatively soft past year. But what I think is part of it's just due to the economy, right, and the fears of recession. The other part of it is we've all been aggressively growing impressions. And so when you take the two, like supply and demand, right, remember the basics, we significantly increased the supply at a time when there's softness in the marketplace. Probably not the right time to be doing what we're doing, but I think most of us that are doing this recognize that we want to have a beachhead, right? We want to have a place there and make sure we're establishing an audience where they're establishing new habits.
Perfect. In a few minutes, I have a big question coming up, but in a little while, if anybody has a question, I'm gonna turn after the next question or two. I'm gonna turn and ask if anybody has a question. So you start thinking if you have one, and you can step up to that mic at some point, and we can take that. But okay, I've heard that next year is an election year. Is that true? I didn't really check my facts on that. But obviously, big banner year always for local, right? It's the ebb and flow of the cycle, and this is certainly the flow. So how are you guys preparing for that, especially in streaming with regards to political discussions? And then, I did want to tie this into the self-service piece. Does that come to bear on the political side as well? But can you guys talk about, on the ad product side, on the actual product side, and then in your client discussions, how are you accounting for that? Because there's always, I know from years of local, right, there'd be the inventory crunch as you get closer towards the election, where your traditional long time clients are being crowded out, right, with very high CPM. So just speak generally. Anyone want to talk a little bit about the upcoming year and what you guys are thinking about without divulging too much?
I think everybody, from what I'm hearing, we're expecting a great year. For political, we have a dedicated DC political sales office. 11 years, I think it's been running, full-time, 24/7, 365, whatever. They're working up through the cycle. We've built a digital sales team, a programmatic team there as well. And so I think we're optimistic. And, a Trump-Biden election, I don't know if that's what this becomes, which is what it's headed to. That Trump's always a wild card. I will say in the past couple cycles, he's changed what we would call battleground states and all that. But I think as an industry, we're optimistic, and at Scripps, we're optimistic.
Yeah, I'd say I'm optimistic about, it helping alleviate some of the problem I was just talking about, and that it's going to, put a bunch of demand into the marketplace on the streaming side. I can't really speak for linear, but on the streaming side, and we saw this in 22, especially in the 2 to 3 months before, not only did, rate go up, but our fill rate went up, and some of that was like political dollars, but a lot of it was just more demand in the marketplace, pushing rate up overall, which helped the performance of the business. So we're optimistic for that next year.
Pushing linear advertisers also into streaming because they're displaced because the political advertisers are buying so much linear. So it's creating a marketplace for local advertisers for sure.
I hope that actually is getting easier, that conversation, because I remember years ago, even though the inventory was there, which meant the audience is there, some of those people didn't even want to hear it. They just, for whatever reason, viscerally opposed whatever. Jen, I think you mentioned political and like when you describe what you do, right? So
yes, we do. And what we've learned is, it's not just waiting for the cycle to come. Political's now year-round. We see it every month, every week, from presidential to statewide to localized elections to runoffs. And yes, we have probably a team that has over 75 years of experience on our own television side, who's very dedicated to the process, and Disney takes it very seriously. And so we were probably first in the space for the streaming side, and really had to build out that ad sales process, what that looks like. And now we have unified, standards across the company. But we take that creative process seriously, and the value of talking to our clients who've been in that market space for a long time. And it is challenging, but we feel it's worthwhile to put forth that same concentration and effort. But we see it all the time. And going back to automation, we see it through programmatic. We see it through our own self-serve, which is called Disney Campaign Manager. We started that last year, and that's continuous all year long. That we'll see, independent.
Is that the name for the people accessing the system as well?
Yeah, Disney Campaign Manager.
That'd be perfect for the election year, right?
Which will include, inventory for Disney Plus in 2024. So we continue to grow that out as well. And so whatever you're buying directly from us, you can buy there on our platform.
Yeah, it's I specifically wanted to hear about that self-serve platform because, when you think of, obviously, the big agencies or the big folks who are handling political agencies based in D.C. who are handling, the presidential or giant, issue-based things or state-based things. But when you think about, there's hundreds of municipalities in the United States, and these are smaller, smaller races, much smaller budgets, but still budgets, right? So how do you get the word out about that self-serve into those places? Right?
We're visible in the community, but it's beyond the DC agencies. They're at the core of it, but there are agencies all over the country or small groups of people. And so what is better than digital and streaming, that one-to-one relationship, with a consumer and a viewer, and bringing that into their living room or how they're consuming that information on the device is really important.
Yeah. I mean, you have obviously local sales folks in your 8 stations, but those are the biggest markets in the country, right?
Yeah.
So, all those other markets, you got to get the word out.
All those, and we all work as one team across the board. So, constantly communicating.
But we also see a lot of the city council and they don't have a lot of money to spend individually, but it adds up. Like in every state, and that comes.
Money is just as green.
Yeah, that comes local, or it comes from regional, or from the state capital, or whatever, something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think BIA, I think Rick is here, and Nicole, I believe they put out their new report, and also showing how the rise of CTV, OTT, while local TV's number 1, continues to grow.
Okay, Rick, you got your shout out. I see you back there. Anybody with a question, step up. Feel free to step up to the mic, and we'll take it in a moment. For the sales, on the sales side, I do want to ask about, and this is a little bit of a curveball, I hope you guys don't mind, currencies, right? Multiple currency. Are we going to get to a single currency? Is there a challenge with just inherently the platforms and how they operate and to get us there? Anybody have a position on that? I know maybe you can't maybe necessarily say specifically, but you're just maybe some thoughts about that evolution or the challenge there. Anybody? No. Dead silence on that.
I can
one.
just say that I don't think we're going to solve this problem in the near term. And I think we're going to be in a multi-currency industry. We have Nielsen on the network side and ComScore on the local side, and we're working to try to do more cross-collaboration, selling audiences, and that's hard when you have different currencies. But I think I spot about 605, who knows what's going on. And the challenge for us in media is when agencies are selecting and they're saying, well, our media choice is going to be this, right? And so we don't subscribe. We can't afford, especially local broadcast, to subscribe to 6 different currencies. It doesn't scale for us. So there has to be some meeting in the middle for the industry, or else agencies have to at least accept whatever we choose as our currency of choice until the industry comes together. That's kind of my thought. Yeah.
We also, offer multiple. We don't have one, and very often it's talking to the client about what they've been using. We can open their eyes to other things if it's meaningful for them, but it's working with the partner to see what they'd like to use.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, right? If they're using something that you're not, right? How are you trying to, make the comparison, right? Say, oh well, that is like this. From what we do.
But ultimately, we have to get, as an industry, consistently to a impression-based world, right? So GRPs just aren't going to carry it forward anymore, right? We have to think that, in the world of what we deliver today, if you look at the Magnet study from the spring, it shows that audiences are, by 2025, there'll be an even amount of digital and linear revenue, and from 25 on, the amount of digital, which I would say is addressable audiences, is going to outpace what we have in linear revenue. And so, if you look at those numbers, I'm scared that what's going to happen is that buyers are going to start saying, well, I'm going to start placing a larger portion of my buy on the addressable, the stream, whatever, and use linear. At some point, will this occur? I don't know. Perhaps use linear for that unique reach. It's kind of a flip of the way that CTV or OTT is being used today, the addressable. So ultimately, shouldn't we have to have all of our inventory completely addressable, linear, apps, CTV, OTT, whatever bucket you want to put it in fast, and even 3.0 eventually when our stations all get there and that transition occurs. And make it simple for buyers to buy audience across all platforms and devices just as audience, not necessarily as a bucket or a silo of this particular type of audience and this particular type of audience. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I think we should just clip that and post it all on our socials right now. That was really well said. Thank you. I'm assuming, Adam, that is exactly what you're, everything's addressable and everything is targetable. That's what you're trying to make happen all the time, right?
Yeah, that's certainly where I think it makes sense for things to move. Right now, there's no process really. We have a couple stations experimenting with kind of the combined linear plus streaming product sale, but in reality, moving to kind of an impression-based model would be extremely helpful in doing that.
Yeah, and I think we need systems to all talk to one another. We need buyers buying the same way, right? And then we need the currency also to fall in line. I think it's like a trifecta, and that is the dream that we all have, and we hope to see it in the near future. But I think all three of those things need to be aligned.
I remember when somebody once said to me, yes to all that, right? We need systems, we need all these things to happen. But even when it doesn't, the budget still exists, and they're still getting money's still coming, right? So
you make it happen.
Right. you figure out a way to make it happen, and you have and you hope that your people are getting the best share possible, right? So at the end of the day, that's really the end.
But buyers are looking for simplicity. So the easier we make it for buyers to access our inventory across multiple devices and screens, the more money that I think that'll flow there, right? And I think the sooner they'll adopt that idea and hopefully have equal value across all of our impressions and audience.
We have a question. Step on it.
Barry Dubin from Sinclair. Question. AI is obviously on everybody's minds. It's what everybody's talking about. I'm sure all your companies are talking about it as well, figuring out how to incorporate it. But if you look at everything from production, programming, sales, operations, measurement, how is AI influencing or disrupting your revenue strategies?
I would say with any new technology that comes into the marketplace, we surely need to pay attention to it and make sure we're staying close to reviewing it. That's where we're going into 2024, trying to see what else we can look at and have case studies on, and how we continue to go through our processes or make sure that we're revising them to keep up with the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think we all have experienced this. Local is hard. It's not easy, and when we look at it from an ad sales and ad tech perspective, there's so much opportunity to streamline it. I know my teams work very, very hard still, even on the digital side, right, to be able to make a buy a reality, because it's still local. From an efficiency perspective, I think there's a long way to go still. So I'm excited about AI from that perspective, and we use it already in small ways throughout our systems. I think it all exists throughout all of our systems today. It's how do we make buying easier through AI, and that's what I try to think about and challenge our teams internally.
Yeah, we're thinking about it, at least in my world, a little bit more from an audience perspective, which at the end of the day drives revenue, right? The biggest issue for us, being this whole dynamic between publishers and kind of some of these emerging platforms, right, that are essentially using our content to train their models, unlike our current, platforms that scrape our content where we at least get traffic referred back to us, right, in terms of social and search. There's no model for that yet with some of these generative AI tools. And that's why you see a lot of publishers, blocking them from crawling their websites. We'll see what happens. I think it's an area where, as an industry, hopefully we can find some leverage to negotiate with kind of some of these emerging players. So far, it's not having a material impact on audience for us, but I think as these models get better, more sophisticated, or indexing content more in real time, it's a real threat that we all need to be mindful of.
I just want to say we're looking at it across the board in lots of areas, from data, from measurement, figuring out ways to be more efficient at everything we're doing. Because I think there's a lot of efficiency that AI can bring. We have a product on the sales side called Market Predict, and so I would say it's less AI, more machine learning, where we actually put the data in. A buyer, instead of saying, I need X number of GRPs or impressions, and it needs to be in these shows. It's like, what audience are you trying to reach? And this, product and a team of data scientists, of what they built, it'll tell us where to put those impressions, and we will deliver with 98% accuracy. And if we under-deliver, then we automatically go in and make good those. We don't have to go back and forth, which is a real problem, and very, very time-consuming, both for the agencies, our buyers, as well as for local. The other unique thing that Kerry Oslin and our team did a couple weeks ago, he took AI just to show us the power or the fear. And he took Adam, our CEO, did a public, call, and so it was a YouTube video. And he dropped that video into AI, and it had the lip syncing, where it adjusted the lip movement and all that, as well as the language, and had Adam do that same presentation in 10 languages. And it was scary watching our CEO talk in Russian. So anyway.
So you guys are buying stations in other countries?
No, not yet.
We are really jumping into AI at Ticker, and quite proudly so. Because we work in volume in everything we do, from the number of interviews that we do per day to the number of proposals that our sales team send out every day. Some of the tools are unbelievable. From our news side, and I'm speaking about it at a panel this afternoon, we have tried to even use AI voices for packages, and then said it doesn't pass the test. So there's always the common sense test of what are people tuning into you for. But I'll give you an example. We start our day every day choosing our themes. What are the topics that we will be discussing each day from an editorial standpoint? We build those themes. We write from scratch our articles. But then we use AI, and we've developed the little systems to essentially go through that and write an on-air script from the original article we wrote, or to write 6 different straps. I've never met a journalist who's come out of university and said, I'm so glad I'm writing 12 key questions for my presenter, or I'm so glad I'm having to write the supers and straps. It's been able to automate it from that perspective, and from a sales team as well. It's been fantastic, trying to work out what are the topics that people are likely to want to be thought leaders on, etc. It's just been great.
So that's a shameless plug for later in the program today, an AI panel and transformation panel. So I hope all of you will be there. Thank you very much. That was well played. Again, presenter experience coming through. I'll just throw in one last thing here, even though I'm the moderator, based on that question. My experience in working in media for many, many years is we have ideas about what we want to do. Almost always things are driven by the buy side, and ultimately where even though we might come up with really incredible tools or processes, et cetera, inside media organizations, oftentimes we wind up reacting to what the buy side wants or what they've done or how they're doing it. So when you talk about machine learning, and these are big pools of data that we have, they're big pools of data that the buy side has, it's a matter of how do you leverage those things together, potentially to solve problems for people, and that's what I think the promise of AI is going to be. And that's not just me, who just finished a course about AI at MIT, talking about that. But anyway, I think we're done here. I want to thank the panel very much for your time. We're right on schedule. And back to Michael.